This year, Life on the Line released a new special project, a special documentary series focusing on veterans' lives after their time in uniform, called Life After Service. All around the country, Australians sign up and put their lives on the line to do their part to protect the nation and its interests. But when the day comes to hang up their uniform for the last time, it's the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. In this series, we talk to some of our veterans about their life after service. So far in this series, we've featured the stories of 6 veterans over 6 episodes. In our first episode, we spoke with Sarah Watson, a former intelligence officer to Ironman athlete to veterans advocate.
That sense of purpose can't be underestimated, especially after service. You need to kind of find what drives you and gives you purpose to be able to move forward with your life.
Our second episode features Glenn Kolomeitz, a former aircraft technician, military policeman and legal officer.
To have that transition piece at least somewhere in the back of your mind. I think you can't really be in defence for the long haul, which I was, not having an exit strategy. It sounds negative, but not having a thought about what you're going to do when you do get it.
Third, we interviewed former SAS trooper and Australian Federal Police officer, Don Barnby.
These people need to be looked after, and they need to know that they can be looked after without affecting their career, because that's their life, and they did it. They volunteered. They did it willingly.
Tony Park, a fiction and non-fiction international best-selling author, was our 4th veteran interviewed on the series, who served in the Australian Army Reserves in various roles, including as a public affairs officer.
So when I hear the stories of veterans who are struggling, even today, of people who've attempted suicide and those whose lives have been lost, unfortunately, I can see how it's happened and how real the problem is.
Our 5th interview was with Tamara Sloper-Harding, who served in the Royal Australian Navy as an intelligence officer and saw deployments to East Timor and Bougainville.
It's very challenging emotionally to have to relive certain situations, so I can understand why a lot of veterans steer clear of going through that process. But the more that we do it and get the help out there for people in need, veterans in need, the more we'll be successful in stopping this terrible trend of this veteran suicide and mental health issues.
Rounding out our series for the year, we interviewed Gary and Renee Wilson. Gary was a signaller attached to the 2nd Commando Regiment, and both of their lives were changed forever when he was severely injured in a Black Hawk helicopter crash.
That's sort of what's kept us going together.
And just know you're both on the same side.
Yeah.
You know, you're fighting with each other, not against each other.
We've put together a few grabs as we revisit the interviews.
Yeah, I think that connection back to your military service is really important to sort of maintain. I mean, you don't have to go and join an ESO, ex-serving organisation, to feel that, but just staying connected to those people who you served with is really helpful to give you a sense of, belonging still. And I think the reason why we have so many veteran organisations and initiatives like Invictus Games is because the military is such a unique line of work, and that it is a vocation. It's more than a job, and it really does catch you off guard when you're no longer part of that. And to then be able to connect back into veteran services that give you sort of those connections and that motivation to try and find yourself again as a civilian. It's really important to a lot of people, not necessary for everybody. Some people transition better, but for a lot of us it is that feeling of, of loss, to be honest, and that the people who you served with really get you, and you've been through something unique together. So So yeah, those connections back are really important to maintain and to find again, you know, as we find ourselves back in the civilian world and working out who we are again. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, Alex, is healthy relationships, and especially not just with people around you, but with yourself. And if you're not honouring yourself and looking after yourself, then it's hard to have healthy relationships with those around you. And I've learnt that from experience with a broken marriage, but I've learned a lot from that as well, and I've grown from that. And it's so long as we go back inside ourselves and find those issues that we are harbouring and try and work on those parts of ourselves that make us who we are, but also the parts that might be holding us back. So, for a while there I was very fixated on my condition that I was diagnosed with. It was really hard to move past, well, I'm Sarah, I've got PTSD. But, even though it might be a condition I have to manage my whole life, it's not going to define who I am. And I was ambitious and I was driven as a young woman before I joined the military, and that's who I want to be again, and that's who I'm starting to find myself back as. So, and it's through service to others, I guess, like you said, like the volunteering with various ESOs, that gives me that sense of passion again and duty and purpose that is cultivated during your service life. So I think if people, who are navigating some difficult conditions from their service, it's not a life sentence. It's not it doesn't mean your life is over. It can be such a powerful thing to create growth in yourself and push you on to do even greater things. And that's what I hope to do, even if it's only in my own little community sphere. That's okay. Like that, I don't need to go out and change the world. I just have to do the best I can as who I am in my community and with my family and my relationships. I guess my sons are kind of like any young boys, are very much into guns and games that involve shooting. And
there's some Nerf water guns down the back there, down the veranda.
20. So I guess conveying about real-time war versus, what you see in the movies, what you see on, internet, Fortnite, I don't know, whatever the games that they're playing. The cost of war is much higher than just the glory of it. And to me, educating them about, what war is about, what the military service is about, is going to be a thing that I'm going to have to direct my energy to, because I want them to really understand not only our amazing Anzac heritage, that I've got 3 grandparents who served in the military who I will want to talk to them about one day. Their father is serving in the military, their uncle served in the military, I served. So there is that deep military connection they're going to have. And I can probably see at least one of my sons joining the military just because of the passion he has for wanting to know more about the military and the army and what roles there are. So yeah, it's something I'll have to really consider how I approach it. I'll be very honest with them and tell them about what happened with me and my service in due course when they can understand. But yeah, I'll be always saying how proud I was to serve my country, and that's something I'll reinforce to them as they are young and as they go on and get older.
Worked as a military prosecutor for a couple of years before I got out, so straight into Canberra prosecuting, which was a high intensity caseload as well, and pretty complex cases. Then I got out, so end of 2012, start of 2013, and I have to say, I found going from really high operational tempo and a really high prosecutorial tempo to outside life, I found it pretty demanding, to be honest. We had a brand new baby. In fact, I think we had 2 by then. And we had to move house from Canberra to here on the coast. So all those little issues, they sort of add up, and it can be, in my case, it was a big step, a big leap. I didn't take advantage of there's a lot of things you can get, like transition assistance in terms of courses and financial assistance. I didn't take advantage of any of that. In hindsight, perhaps I should, but but I sort of wanted to get out and get in there straight away and start doing this veterans work. So I didn't really pursue those opportunities, but they're there. A lot of work needs to be done in the transition space, definitely, a lot of work. But the opportunities are there. I know DVA and Defence, but DVA has, Veterans Affairs has a certain amount of funding for reskilling and retraining, and I know state governments, New South Wales particularly, have programs to reskill people. In fact, New South Wales TAFE, veterans can do certain free TAFE programs with a view to getting employment outside of Defence. So the opportunities are there, but I think Defence should market that more. I know a lot of my clients have left and they weren't aware of what they could take advantage of, and therefore their transition was less than ideal, particularly if they're struggling. And most of these younger veterans, if they're struggling, don't want to be on the couch on pensions for the rest of their lives. And Mick Bainbridge is a classic example. He didn't want to be on a pension for the rest of his life. He wanted a profession. He needed that bit of a hand to get there, so he had some money and some support, through that program. But he's now out there kicking goals, and I think if the younger veterans are capable of reskilling, and I suspect the vast majority are, then take the opportunities and use that to deal with to some extent, to deal with the mental health concerns. And we have a lot of cases where our clients struggled, the wheels come off. We get them back on the rails, they then reskill, and they're out there contributing. The guys in Wagga are a classic example. These 3 clients down there who were struggling, and now they're making an enormous contribution to the community and the veteran space down there.
There was no counselling after Vietnam. There was no counselling in the police force, even during the police force days. I think we started getting psychologists embedded within the police force in the mid 80s, late 80s. But while I was in the police force, I went to quite a lot of suicides. I went to countless fatal accidents and some really bad ones. I went not to investigate, I was never a detective, but I went to the scene of quite a lot of murders in Canberra, and some really bad ones and quite infamous ones in the history of Canberra in the last 50 odd years. There was no counselling. Our counselling in those days, you'd go to a fatal accident, and I went to some real bad ones, and was to go up to where New Parliament House is now. It used to be called Capitol Hill, with a slab of beer and drink it out. That was the counselling. I mean, there was no counselling. There was no counselling. I didn't get any counselling after Bougainville. Not that I really needed it, I don't think, after Bougainville. But after East Timor, there was counselling available. But my partner at that stage, I was gutted. I was just not in a good place. And she persuaded me to go through DVA or VVCS, Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service, to get help, which I did. And from then on, I'm still seeing a psych every now and again, because PTSD cut in big time. As I said to a mate of mine from the regiment, years after Timor, he was over in Perth over in Canberra for some reason. He said, "Mate, you've been to the Well of Courage too often, and the bloody well's dry. So no more. That's enough. Enough is enough." So, and I realised that, and I never offered to go back on any other missions. I would have been a liability rather than anything, because Timor, that was the brick wall. That did me in. It did quite a few of the guys in, actually. As an organisation, whether it be police, military, don't make the person that has been through whatever experience, don't make them feel guilty for needing or asking for help, because a lot of guys, and I know it's out there, a lot of the, when I say guys, I mean women too. A lot of these people, they know that if they go through their service organisation and ask for help because they need it, it could affect their career. So that roadblock has to be taken out for a start, because I think it was Major General, don't quote me, or whatever rank he was, Cantwell. He went publicly after his term in, I think in Iraq, and he said, you know, PTSD, whack me, and we need to look after these people. So I'd make the stigma of needing help not-existent. If you need it, you get it, and it's available. And because everybody has a point that, you know, and it does affect you. You go away as one person, you come back, if you've experienced, you know, you can go away on lots of missions, and they're quite, not easy, but eventless, you know, what is it? Not eventful. But you go away on some missions and you hit the wall. So these people need to be looked after, and they need to know that they can be looked after without affecting their career, because, you know, that's their life, and they did it. They volunteered. They did it willingly, and the country that sends you away should look after you when you come back. And just letting that message permeate right through all these places that send people away. Help's available if you need it, and it ain't going to affect your career. Get it if you need it. That's probably my one message. I mean, there's probably others, but I haven't had time to think about it. So.
Yeah, I had mates, I had family there, I had a sense of belonging, and I think I'd also fallen into that trap of thinking it was one of the things that defined me. So it wasn't who I was as a person, it was the fact I was defined by the fact, as it said in the biography for every one of my novels that kept coming out every year, Tony Park's also an officer in the Australian Army Reserve and served in Afghanistan, and it seemed to be part of who I was, or it defined me, and I think that's a mistake. And I think I would probably have been in a better position, I think personally, in terms of my personal development and even my personal life and my mental health and various things, if I had got out sooner. So it's kind of at odds with what a lot of people say. A lot of people's experience is that they're, particularly men and women with PTSD, a common complaint that I still hear today, and it's very real, is that the Defence Force is too keen to get rid of them, to give them a pension, recognise their condition, but just make them somebody else's problem. I think I was creating a lot of problems for myself just by hanging around hoping I'd get better, you know, hoping that the Army would be more like what I hoped it would be, which was not fair on either of us. So I had a difficult transition, and I got to the stage where I was doing nothing. So I wasn't benefiting the Army, I wasn't benefiting me, and I would get these shape up or ship out emails once a year saying, are you going to do anything? If not, get out. And I couldn't, but eventually I said yes. And then I got an email in 2016 that basically said, your request for separation has been approved. I didn't have to worry about transitioning because I already had a job. But it's something we hear time and time again about the lack of support and lack of preparedness for people leaving the Defence Force, many of whom have had as much time as I have, but in the full-time Army, and not being supported or prepared for their time to leave. And I've seen so many examples of that. When I was working as a public relations officer for one of the brigades in the late 1990s. I mean, I was with, my brigade major had served in Rwanda, and he was getting ready to leave the regular army, and he came to me and said, I just have to ask you these questions. He said, headhunters, recruitment agents, do I have to pay them to find me a job? That was the level of preparedness that a major, you know, a field grade officer had back then. And in so many ways, it hasn't changed. I think if you look at Veterans Affairs today, it's still in the news. And you know, I'm working on a book now, you know, where these issues have happened during the Vietnam War and then all the operations since, where there is this disconnect between the military and then the veterans community and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And people tell me now that people leaving the military now, they have a seminar from DVA, They are given a veteran's white card which entitles them to free mental health care and free treatment for serious medical conditions such as cancer and other illnesses. Now, that's great. That's great, but that's only happened in the last year or two, after our longest war ever is over.
I'm actually privileged to be the Vice President of the Avalon Beach RSL sub-branch, which is different. A lot of people don't understand the difference between the RSL clubs and the RSL sub-branches. So the sub-branch looks after veterans and their families and welfare, and keeps that sense of community that we've been used to having in the military alive for us to help with transition to civilian life. So it plays a really important role, and we're just really fortunate in Avalon that the Club Limited, Avalon Beach RSL Club, are really supportive of the veterans and everything we do in the sub-branch. They support all of our memorial ceremonies, and they're always willing to help us host functions for veterans, and it's just a beautiful community atmosphere here. So we are really lucky. There's a difference between other RSL clubs and this one at Avalon because the staff really care about veterans and their history. So it's a pretty special place. It is. I'm going through it myself at the moment, and I'm finding it really challenging. We have some amazing volunteer advocates here at our sub-branch and at the Veterans Centre at DY as well, who help us through the paperwork, because I've got a pile this thick that my GP has to go through assessing any injuries from my service time, and it's very challenging emotionally to have to relive certain situations, so I can understand why a lot of veterans steer clear of going through that process. But the more that we do it and get the help out there for people in need, veterans in need, the more we'll be successful in stopping this terrible trend of this veteran suicide and mental health issues.
For me, there is a significant gap in the current veteran support system, which is families, and I mean families in a very general sense, but in particular I mean civilian families. So if I had worn a uniform, there are a plethora of supports out there for me. Now, the issue isn't the number of supports, the issue is accessibility. So there's an issue of how I can access what's out there for me, but nonetheless, there is a safety net out there to capture me. As a civilian, that safety net is not as coherent, it's not as robust, yet I still manage the impacts of military service every day. So for me, and there has been this need for a very long time. I noticed it pretty much day one after Gary's accident. There, was a number of systems that were already in place to wrap around the widows, which is great, and as it should have been. But for a couple of people in the regiment at the time, I effectively would have walked that journey on my own. But for the bonds that we had already created with others, I would have been sort of almost isolated, being the civilian in the group that wasn't a widow, and even worse for someone like Gary's mum, who wasn't the widow, isn't the fiance, isn't the wife. So there's just, for me, and it's become glaringly obvious, particularly after events like Invictus. Invictus was the first one that I had seen that really respected and honoured the role of families, particularly post-injury, and the families of those that are managing and supporting people with mental injuries themselves. So it just, the more and more I've realised how isolated we all are, I really want to build that community. I really want people to recognise that they're part of that community and that they're not alone, that there is a significant network of women and families that are out there that have all walked a similar journey. One of the very lovely war widows put it so nicely the other day when I was telling her about my experience, and the first thing she said to me was, she's like, we have this bond that transcends, any form of generational gap or geographical gap, and that's what we're connecting on. And I think she's exactly right. And for me, that's out there, and if we can help to fill that need in the community, I think we're going to equip the families much better to look after themselves. And then if they can look after themselves, hopefully we can have a positive impact on potential intergenerational trauma, and then have a positive impact on the veterans themselves and their long-term health and well-being.
Well, that's a relatively, well, I guess the concept's always kind of been there, you know, ever since we started to get out more and sort of tell our stories. We're keen to do that because we want people to see that just because something shit happens, it doesn't mean that that's your whole life. You know, you can come out the other side.
And it doesn't define you. Like,
yeah,
your injuries, whatever you've been through, whatever happened to you, isn't who you are as a person. Like a career, like there's a part of your life that's now helped you get to where you are currently.
Yeah. So we want people to hopefully see the light at the end of their tunnel. So once COVID goes away a bit, we'll probably hopefully get back out there a bit more and do some of that. But what we're doing at the moment, is a sort of a side project which sits under that banner, which is basically making face masks, selling them, and the profits of the face masks are being pooled and they'll be donated towards the Invictus Family and Friends program once Invictus gets going again in Australia. So and my focus there is again rolling back to community and wanting to have some form of activity that money can fund, which will build social cohesiveness in that group, so that when the games end, because it is such a great experience and you are on this massive high, they know that there's a support network for them. So the athletes get to build that all the way through as they go through the journey of getting ready for competition and competing and post, and you know, they still have their network, but the families are only brought together for one event and a flash in the pan. So it's being able to have an activity that will bring them together and will break down the barriers is what I'm really trying to do with the money that's being pulled from that. And unfortunately, I'm making all the masks on my own because he can't cut material.
No, I can't, sorry.
Yeah.
It's everyone, helping everyone by not touching it.
Yeah.
We wanted to thank you for your support with our new series, and we would love to know what you want to see in the season's return next year.
When the shots crack around you, you remember the high. But it wasn't excitement, it was just terrifying. The steel tore through clothing, mud walls, trees and flesh, as I emptied my mag towards nothing at best. And as I crawled forward and I looked through my sights, I turned and saw Rowdy give a wink and a smile. He shouted with me as he sprung to his feet with his gun up and firing out into the green and the dirt all around him like rain on a pond as he made his way into the hell just beyond. Well, I've tried to forget how I've tried the day my best mate put in